Roots, New Art on Stage.
Welcome to the 16th edition of The Art of Assembly. The Art of Assembly is a nomadic series of lectures and conversations on the potential of gatherings in activism, art and politics, and it is by now also quite an extensive internet resource with videos, podcasts, texts and a lot of other materials. So if you're interested, please check it out, art-of-assembly.net. My name is Florian Malzacher. I'm a performing arts curator and writer, and I'm hosting the series, which was initiated together with Brut Theater in Vienna. Today's episode is based on a live event at Kunsthalle Vienna on May 4th, 2022, and has the title Shifting Power When Grassroots Movements Win Elections. And my guests are Athena Athanasiou, Teodor Celakoski and Marcelo Expósito, and I'm very thankful to Kunsthalle Vienna and would like to thank especially the directors, the curatorial collective of WHW, WHW, and the whole team of Kunsthalle. In this series, we have been talking a lot about the strength assemblies can give to social and political movements, a feeling of collectivity, a feeling of power, of not being alone, and so on. And we have often talked about what follows, which is very often heavy backlashes, as for example in Egypt, Turkey, Hong Kong, after the famous square occupations, to just mention a few. Or kind of wearing off, losing momentum, fading out, the clock running against the movement, the powers that be just wait till everything disappears and returns to normal again. What we didn't talk much so far, and maybe that's telling, is what happens when a movement actually becomes successful within a representative system. In this case, when a movement, after many years of struggles and work on the ground, for example, wins an election. There's a lot of enthusiasm, but often there are also, or actually always there are also larger than life expectations then. A diverse electorate with often very different expectation demands immediate and fundamental shifts of politics. The parties once in power just wait for any opportunity to attack. The former establishment uses its long-knit networks to slow down any transition, and former allies accuse the elected representatives of their compromises. So today we want to look a bit at what actually does it mean to govern, to change structures, to work with a large administration, include the political base, and at the end, hopefully, to accomplish some concrete change. In a European context, the most famous example for social movements coming to power happened in Greece and Spain, and we will talk about this. But as it was already said, this evening is very directly inspired by the impressive trajectory of the Croatian movement Možemo, with its landslide victory in Zagreb city elections in May 2021. And again, like in many other movements, many artists, cultural workers and so have been involved. So for me it was very interesting to learn from friends how this victory over many, many years had been exchanged, how it was possible to enlarge the base of supporters, and how this, I would say, almost miracle could happen in Zagreb. And I was, as much as I was impressed by the work done, as much I was annoyed by the fact that it was basically not noticed outside of Croatia or at least other former Yugoslav countries. So there's basically, if you do research as I did, there's basically nothing written in English, German, or any other, for me, accessible language about what is happening there. So I'm very happy that this edition of The Art of Assembly, cultural worker and activist Teodor Celakoski will talk about strategies used to achieve Možemo's success, but also about the difficulties of implementing new policy, I guess. Artist, activist and former member of the Spanish Parliament, Marcelo Expósito, will give insights in the struggles, achievements and failures of Podemos and other citizens' electoral organizations in Spain. And drawing on the trajectory of SYRIZA after winning the general election in Greece 2015, philosopher Athena Athanasiou reflects more generally on the conditions activist movements are confronted with when coming to power. And you are also our first speaker, joining us from Athens. So let me just briefly introduce you. Athena Athanasiou is professor of social anthropology and gender theory at Pantheon University of Social and Political Sciences in Athens. She's the director of the Laboratory of Anthropological Research and dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences. And among her publications are the books Agonistic Mourning, Political Dissidents and the Women in Black from 2017, Dispossession, The Performative and the Political, together with Judith Butler from 2013, Crisis as a State of Exception, 2012, and Life at the Limit, Essays on Gender, Body and Biopolitics from 2007, and many more that I will not all mention. Full bios are also on the website. Athena, we have been very closely and very also critically following the development of SYRIZA before and after the elections in 2015, when SYRIZA came to power, and you will reflect on the crucial question underlying the session: what do we lose when we win, and what do we win when we lose? I'm very glad you join us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Florian. Warm greetings to everyone. Thanks to Kunsthalle Wien for inviting me. Many thanks to Florian for putting together this extraordinary series. I'm very pleased to be with you this evening and sharing this conversation and this edition of the Art of Assembly with friends and allies. This is really a great theme to reflect upon, especially in these harrowing times when the space for such discussions is desperately needed, especially spaces with a transnational and transversal scope. So the thoughts that I will share with you tonight linger on the question of critical possibility, and more specifically, the complex political temporalities that sustain critical and transformative potential in the present and for the future. I will try to complicate the terms of this questioning and try to show how they do not easily fit into an oppositional schema that pits success against failure or hope against despair, and even optimism against pessimism. So we'll try to complicate the terms of this reflection here, trying to problematize these oppositionary schemas. Now, in so doing, I'm motivated by the ways different critical epistemologies and political visions in the intersecting modalities of feminist, decolonial, anti-racist, anti-neoliberal, and queer of color critique embrace the aporias of subjectivation, contingency, and trouble as crucial means for theorizing potentially subversive possibilities and bringing about radical change in the contemporary world. From the perspective of movements of collective mobilization and transformative hope, producing possibilities for anti-fascist political life in the present, despite and against the neoliberal doctrine, there is no alternative, is about the collective work of engaging in practices of countering institutionalized injustice and of instituting otherwise, taking place within and constrained by the measure of the possible, to recall Walter Benjamin. Activist movements and left coalitions seek to actualize the potential of the particular now, while at the same time demanding the impossible, to evoke the famous Zapatista rallying cry. In other words, they struggle to make life more bearable in the present for those whose lives have been subjected to class, racial, and gendered powers, while at the same time shifting the conditions of possibility posed by this existing present. In reconfiguring the precarious interstices of no longer and not yet, such collectivities and coalitions take the present as a historically situated field of performative and transformative possibility, including, of course, the possibility to fail better, in Samuel Beckett's memorable words. And so I would like to take the theme of our today's gathering as a provocation to invoke possibilities for critical imaginaries and transformative hope in these times of ongoing and interlocking crises, and at a historical moment when the space of collective mobilization and dissent is decimated by a crisis-afflicted neoliberal realpolitik and by neo-fascist assaults on democracy. The question of these movements and coalitions in these post-political times is how to expose and shift the condition of possibility for acting politically to transfigure the present amidst conditions that undermine and allocate unjustly the possibility of imagining differently. Assembling in public, these movements perform the yet to come of social justice in claiming spaces to breathe as horizons of equality and justice. In so doing, they open a possibility for a different kind of political engagement, a different kind of politics. In the wake of transversal movements such as Black Lives Matter and Ni Una Menos, the intersectional feminist movement that resists and fights the killing of women, trans people, and those subjected to masculinist and neoliberal violence, we need to attend, I think, to the ways in which the agonistic democratic gatherings of those dispossessed by interlocking class, racial, and gendered subjection not only troubles such entrenched regimes of differential vulnerability and disposability, but also enacts political change by performing participatory democratic politics of radical equality, critical imagination, care, the recent and current multiplicity of diverse struggles, assemblies, demonstrations, and encuentros attuned to the persistent connections between patriarchy, capitalism, racism, and colonialism delineates a new horizon of transformative hope. If hope is an impossible demand, then we demand the impossible, Judith Butler declared in her own speech, amplified by a human microphone at Occupy Wall Street in 2011. 11 years later, summoning the ghosts of public occupations all over the world and motivated by this agonistic temporality of assembling, acting, and thinking with others, I would suggest that we reconfigure hope as a cautious and fragile political affect that resists closure and finality and is capable of complexity, difference, and care. As I am particularly interested in thinking the conditions of possibility for cultivating hope as a figure of aporia, allow me a reflective aside on left critical thought regarding the hope and the melancholy accompanying the impulse to implement a politics that shifts the limits of the possible in the name of those subjected to the structural violences of injustice and inequality. In Theodor Adorno's thought, social hope resides in the intractable remains of non-realized promises made in the face of historical catastrophe and despair. Any utopian resolution is thus unavoidably a re-articulation of the present order and answerable to the actually existing state of despair. And so the task of critical theory in face of despair would be emphatically about the exposure of what presently exists. In this sense, utopian vision always remains subject to the fraught dialectics of possibility and impossibility. For Ernst Bloch, on the other hand, utopia becomes a guiding principle for critical imagination, for the overcoming of that which already is and the striving for what is yet unrealized. And yet, significantly, utopian thought always carries a melancholy of fulfillment within itself. In that respect, Bloch's philosophy of history allows for a utopian openness that remains unpredetermined. Utopia, in a sense, it is partially here in the present, but also not quite here, and surely not fully accessible or foreseeable in the now. What matters about utopia then is not really the completed realization in the future, but rather the articulation of its possibility, or to put it differently, the actuality of the not yet, that is the indefinite utopian surplus that exceeds the present protocols of signification and representation. What I find enabling in the implications of this encounter is that it allows for both the reappropriation of the concept of utopia as a figure for critical political imagination, and a critique of normative utopianism as a teleological and essentialist closure of political temporality. What plays a catalytic role in this reconsideration is the attention to limits as a condition of possibility for politics, as a performative field of both vulnerability to power and collective agency against this very power. The rehabilitation of hope itself remains a restless collective experience of the here and now. In fact, there's no assurance that hope will elicit sustainable forces of world-making. Hope is the opposite of naive optimism, writes Bloch. In what ways then might our transformative hopes and critical epistemologies, operating necessarily from the inside, that is, from the very meshes of subjectivation and power, induce potentialities for our times, despite and against the power apparatuses that devastate the present and future? When movements and left coalitions claim power, the wager of their battle is about remaking power. They enact a complex collective conceptualization of critical possibility, not in terms of providential blueprints and presumed immunity to established powers, but rather in terms of a situated and restless engagement that entails constantly troubling and transforming its own terms. In this sense, winning the elections for grassroots movements is not a virtue in and of itself. It is rather a historically conditioned part of current and ongoing struggles for social justice and radical equality. It is about reframing the present as a resource for collective resistance to and agonistic alteration of ongoing conditions of racism, economic destitution, precarization, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. At the heart of this perspective lies a critical engagement with impossible possibilities in a present marked and constrained by neoliberal authoritarianism, racialized dispossession, and the persistent growth of neo-fascist, racist, and sexist discourses and practices. I just use the phrase impossible possibilities just to denote a possible impossible dialectics that runs counter to the infamous cornerstone of realpolitik, that politics is the art of the possible. I would like to propose that instead of treating the interminable question of the capacity to act in terms of possible versus impossible, we address the irreducible modality of impossibility, im/possibility, as one that requires a new thinking of the possible, to invoke Jacques Derrida. In this sense, the impossible does not simply denote the opposite of the possible, but rather introduces into the possible. That's again Jacques Derrida. In this regard, in the agonistic democratic politics of left movements, what is yet to come is marked by the contingencies of a here and now, in which much more complicated than those perceived in terms of a straightforward teleological realization, and in ways capable of complicating those premises of straightforward realization. To put it another way, the critical performativity of resisting the present and resisting in the present involves acting here and now as if it were possible within such limits, in Derrida's terms, to rethink and keep the question of the possible open as an aporetic call for another kind of politics that simultaneously performs and resists the present. The critical performativity of resisting in the present and resisting the present also keeps alive the question that Hannah Arendt was reported to have once asked: what will we lose if we win? Alerting to the undecidable ambivalence of the object of one's political commitment, Arendt's question also indicates the need to constantly guard against the institutionalization of one's political desires, especially in the face of victory or satisfaction of such ideals. Arendt's question, however, might work the other way around as well. What will we win if we lose? We have, I think, yet to make way for re-articulating a performative account of defeat as a multivalent political concept by reclaiming it from pejorative to enabling. I will get back to this point in a minute, but I wanted to invoke Rosa Luxemburg's vision of revolution, in which is a necessary component of social struggles. To me, the concern with critically attending to the present at this overwhelming moment is entangled with carving out spaces of situated knowledges, agonistic intimacies, solidarity, care, and critical imagination to collectively endure and to dismantle the suffocating banality of this present, as well as to do the work of reimagining and building equitable futures in the present, as we engage in practices of gathering together and instituting otherwise. There are no assurances or blueprints about the foundations or the effectiveness of this otherwiseness. Our task is to constantly and collectively re-articulate the possibility, giving it new and different inflections. In her fascinating book, The Argonauts, poet and critic Maggie Nelson writes of sending her lover a passage from Roland Barthes' autobiography, where he states that the one who says, "I love you," is like the Argonaut renewing his ship during its voyage without changing its name. Nelson writes, I quote, "Just as the Argos parts may be replaced over time, but the boat is still called the Argo. Whenever the lover utters the phrase, 'I love you,' its meaning must be renewed by each use," end of quote. I think this idea has important resonance with the history of radical imaginaries and hopes. Their performative possibility relies on the limitations of available languages, resources, and infrastructures. Radical imagination is always a quotation to be reinvented by each use in reckoning with the temporal circumstances of the impossible and responding to the situated collective visions for change. Each use of critical imagination becomes an occasion for reiterating, re-embodying, and queering the complex historicity of the possible. In her book, What's the Use?, Sarah Ahmed engages the potential for queer use. That is, what happens when things are used in ways that were not intended or by those for whom they were not intended. Perhaps this is how the very conditions for troubling and dismantling the apparatuses of subjection are brought about. The project of instituting otherwise is an open-ended performative process of repurposing, reoccupying, and opening up the political to those who have been rendered disposable. This work is crafted with uncharted contingencies, hope, disappointments, partial victories, compromises, pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will, as well as occasional rearticulations and shifts in the authorized limits of the political possible. Such uncharted performative complexities emerged also in the context of the confrontation of SYRIZA, the coalition of radical left in Greece, with the neoliberal forces of the EU in 2015. A confrontation meant to signal that there might be another Europe possible, other than the imperial and neoliberal genealogies that have made Europe intelligible. Florian asked me to share some retrospective thoughts on the SYRIZA moment, which I will try to do very briefly here. The strategy of the SYRIZA government was performative and transformative in its radical democratic and socialist implications. Refusing neoliberal politics of severe austerity without leaving the Eurozone. Now, the compatibility of these two commitments was to be sorely tested by the existing balance of power. But SYRIZA was elected on the basis of that strategy. It was elected on the basis of that performative contradiction, on the promise of deploying this performative contradiction to produce radical democratic effects. So taking on the government provided SYRIZA with an impossible choice: abandoning the Eurozone at that juncture in political time would have had pernicious effects on the most oppressed and vulnerable layers of the working classes. The impossibility to cover energy needs would have been disastrous for them. Grexit was neither a viable alternative nor part of the SYRIZA pre-election campaign. Even more, Grexit was the scenario for which SYRIZA did not have a mandate even after the referendum. In the face of that impossible situation, the SYRIZA government was forced to sign a memorandum on the basis of the threat of expelling Greece from the Eurozone and leaving its banking system without support. In retrospect, one might ask, was that outrageous extortion by the neoliberal European elites an occasion for easy charges of betrayal among the left, or instead for international left solidarity with the democratic will of the Greek people and the rupture that SYRIZA had initiated? Unfortunately, the former largely became the case. Even despite the compromise of July 13, 2015, however, SYRIZA succeeded in politicizing the debt question, delegitimizing austerity policies, but also putting in question the normativity of the EU as a post-democratic neoliberal project. During the years of its government and by managing to stay in office despite the constant delegitimation and overwhelming duress, SYRIZA took advantage of all room for maneuver in defending and implementing a program of redistribution policies. It passed laws that carried clear left democratic violence and signaled its radical difference from its predecessors, neoliberal politicians and technocrats. That record of instituting otherwise included a law that provided relief from humanitarian crisis by offering free food, electricity, and public health access to those who have been mostly affected by the austerity policies. The citizenship law, which granted nationality to all second-generation immigrants and first-generation immigrant children who had 5 years of schooling in Greece. the active defense of public health and public education against the forces of financialization and possessive individualism, the closure of the detention centers for arriving asylum seekers and non-regularized migrants, the law designed to democratize penal law and to ensure the humane treatment of those incarcerated in the country's prison system, etc. Most importantly, the explosion of popular support for SYRIZA thwarted the rise of neo-fascist Golden Dawn. SYRIZA has, of course, been facing the danger of being assimilated and depoliticized. This is arguably a danger for any radical left government taking office within capitalism. Today, the pressure by established elites that force SYRIZA to turn into a center-left party is overwhelming. Given that social democracy has embraced neoliberalism in Greece as well as elsewhere, the transformation of SYRIZA into a social democratic party would be a real defeat. I believe there's no easy answer to these conundrums. The question of how to mobilize our impasses and defeats is a matter of collective intellect, international solidarity, and an ever-renewed ethics of care and comradeship, especially in such complex moments. As Sam Gintin and Leo Panic wrote in 2015 in relation to what they called the SYRIZA dilemma, I quote, "Debates within the left are absolutely essential, but they should be conducted without easy revolutionary posturing and with appropriate modesty, because no one has easy answers in this difficult and complex moment," end of quote. I agree. All that said, I would like to conclude my remarks, on a slightly different note. Today, in contexts of pervasive and accelerating structural economic and racial inequalities around the pandemic, and in the midst of the piling ruins of post-democratic neoliberal necropolitics, movements of collective mobilization and transformative hope are threatened by criminalization of dissent. The far right has become mainstream and converges with neoliberal governmentality in declaring war on alleged national enemies such as Islamo-leftism and gender ideology. Against this backdrop, the daunting challenge we are confronted with is unfortunately not so much what happens when these movements claim and take power, but rather what happens when they are threatened and criminalized because right-wing and far right-wing authoritarian forces rise to power. Finally, then, the question becomes how resistance, civil disobedience, dissent, global solidarity, and an ethics of care can be reimagined, organized, and enacted in these cruel times to reverse the fascist drift, to re-articulate radical equality, and to build a different world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for laying out the ground, the complex ground for our talk tonight. We will come back to all this, but before this I introduce Marcelo Expósito a little bit further. You are an artist, teacher and cultural critic, and as an author and editor you have published around 20 monographs, including Plebeian Discourses in 2020, Conversation with Manuel Borja Vilel from 2015, and Walter Benjamin, Productivist in 2013. Marcelo has participated for 3 decades in social movements for democratic radicalization, and from 2016 to 2019 he was secretary of the Congress of Deputies and deputy in the Spanish Cortes Generales, which is the Spanish national parliament. And you call yourself a double activist, talk of double activism, participating in radical democratic movements and attempting to politicize the art field at the same time. So from this position, I'm really happy to hear you speak tonight. Glad that you're here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and that's what I'm trying, yes. Well, thanks everybody for inviting me to this nice meeting, and thanks everybody for coming. And since English far from being my first language, and I wanted to be precise about certain ideas I wanted to express, I don't normally read in these kind of meetings or discussions, but I'm going to do it now. So I wrote down some of these ideas, and well, I'm going to start straight ahead because it's going to take a bit of time, I think. The world today is at serious crossroads. Although official discourses insist in each of the recent crises that the way out is closed, the truth is that no one is unaware that we are suffering from a chain of the 2007 financial crisis, the 2020 global public health crisis, and the ecological crisis that sends us signals from everywhere in an increasingly intense way. Added to this chain is now the international militarist intensification as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It is a collection of crises that are in no way disconnected from each other, and whose relationship is even more complex than that of a simple overlap. They are closely interconnected tremors, altogether symptomatic of the crisis of a historical cycle that we have been identifying with the global rise and collapse of neoliberal hegemony. The relationship between historically anti-authoritarian practices and state apparatuses currently faces a very complex dilemma that we must state at the outset. The institutions of liberal democracy are deteriorating in full view of the world. This deterioration is not only the result of negligence or circumstantial corruption. These subjects, historically subalternized by the patriarchal, colonial, and labor domination devices of modernity, have been very effective in pointing out the problems inherent in the democratic institutions inherited from European modernity, about their mechanisms of exclusion and their structural violence. But at the same time, the democratic institutions are emptied out of their functions by neoliberalism and by what Enzo Traverso calls the new radical right wings are preparing to occupy the state. Faced with this dramatic situation, the movements that come from an anti-authoritarian historical matrix are being forced to dispute democratic institutions, while at the same time continuing to exercise institutional criticism, as I heard Athena, by the way, synthesized during a conference to which we had the pleasure of inviting her at the MACBA in Barcelona in 2018, that is 1 year before the formation of the Spanish progressive government through a coalition of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party with Podemos and their political alliances of the New Left. What in Spain we used to call the new politics, the name given to the appearance of citizen electoral platforms, substantially shares the same recent genealogy as other experiences of institutional leap from the movements that are taking place in Europe and Latin America. This short cycle genealogy has its origin in the impact that the financial crisis of 2007 caused globally, coming into resonance with the growing world feeling that the really existing democracy was increasingly insufficient in the face of an increasingly interconnected social subjectivity, active and cooperative. Between the years 2010 and 2013, we experienced a true global wave of citizen insurgencies, simultaneously against authoritarianism and for democratic radicalization. The Arab Springs, the protests against the crisis throughout Southern Europe, from Greece to Portugal, Occupy New York, and student and youth movements in Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, or Chile. The movements of the squares demanded to put people above the economy, to rebuild democracy by reinventing the simplest vocabulary: democracy, dignity, freedom, or justice. There were words that the radical left had been giving up for a long time, considering them a soft, ineffective political language. It is interesting to realize that this synthetic vocabulary is almost exactly the same as that vocabulary mobilized by the Zapatista Army of National Liberation when it broke into world public opinion in 1994 to oppose free trade agreements, one of the tools with which neoliberalism exercised aggressive neocolonial policies over increasingly larger spaces of our planet, implanting a model of globalization at the service of the elites. So what's interesting about this coincidence that can serve as a political lesson for us today? The dispute over the signifier democracy that took place in both 1994 and around 2011 exemplifies one of the most important mechanisms for the construction of political processes in the historical cycle of anti-neoliberal struggle. It exemplifies what Ernesto Laclau theoretically studied as a political dispute over floating signifiers, and what Laclau, together with Chantal Mouffe, theoretically called the construction of a chain of equivalences. One of the most powerful images produced by the Zapatistas in their first period of public eruption is the one in which Marcos displayed a Mexican flag in front of dozens of journalists, disorienting the representatives of the Mexican government who did not expect a guerrilla to vindicate that patriotic symbol. The political dispute to give a new meaning to the signs kidnapped by the powers of corrupt institutions like the flag or the word democracy is one of the simplest examples of Laclau's theory on the struggle around signifiers. And the construction of a chain of equivalences has been the fundamental way in which the movements of the anti-neoliberal cycle have managed to overcome fragmentation in order to make leaps of scale in a way that is different from the leftist fetishism of unity and the leftist authoritarianism of the subordination of all fights into one. Militant feminist theories like the Argentinian Verónica Gago talks us about how the key to multiplying struggles by chaining them together is to enhance what is common in each particularity. It is not the universal about the particularities. They are not the particularities as opposed to universality. It is about finding the common that each particular can potentially contain. The explanation of how the Chilean student movement of 2011 multiplied, activating a chain of social relations against the neoliberalism that in Chile had been founded by the Pinochet dictatorship, lies in the way in which the students managed to make society understand that the privatization of university education was a particular problem that was immediately reflected as a common problem, the slavery of the whole society to the debt mechanism. Constructing a chain of equivalences then means articulating the struggles between diverse subjectivities in such a way that none is subordinated to the other, nor does a mere unification arise. It is about articulating equivalent differences. The key lies precisely in finding the common that is contained in particularity, because that common is precisely the point of articulation which allows a chain reaction of protest to be provoked in a society. The platform of people affected by mortgages, la plataforma de afectados por la hipoteca, VIPA, was founded in Barcelona in 2009. Its main spokesperson, Ada Colau, is still the mayor of the city today, after the citizen electoral platform Barcelona en Comú won the municipal election in 2015. As a result of the 2007 financial crisis and the bursting of the real estate bubble, evictions multiplied in Spain until they became the scene of an unprecedented violence and incalculable social suffering. The PA began in a very simple way, as social movements that arise from suffering usually begin in an archetypal way, creating spaces for collective understanding of problems that are felt as individual, spaces that are also communities of mutual support. The PA unleashed a chain of equivalences when it made society as a whole understand that the wave of evictions was nothing more than a metonymy for the whole impact of neoliberal policies and the neoliberal management of the crisis on public services, on the common good, and on the very lives of people. The PA became, after M15, the Spanish movement of squares of 2011, a kind of collective leadership for all the powerful movements against austerity policies and in defense of public services. Given the ineffectiveness of the institutional left represented by the social liberalism of the Socialist Party, the ties against austerity became the true opposition to the right-wing government of the Popular Party. But not even in the moments of greatest strength of the citizenry in the streets were even the slightest rectification of the austerity policies achieved. That was what we call the glass ceiling of the movements against the crisis. That glass ceiling was the reason why the need to occupy democratic institutions through electoral means began to be discussed. Two were in Spain the main channels through which the institutional leap was conceived. On the one hand, Podemos considered the jump from above, first to the parliaments and then to the state government. On the other hand, the municipalist movement proposed a jump down to the local levels of government. The result was an earthquake in 2015. The local governments of many of the cities in Spain were won: Barcelona, Madrid, Zaragoza, Coruña, Compostela, Cádiz, or Valencia. Those first experiences of government were decisive for us to understand the complexity contained in an idea that we repeated in the campaigns. Having the government is not having all the power. From the complexity of governing from the tradition of social or citizen movements, I'm going to highlight three problems that derive immediately from each of the 3 points of what we call the minimum program that we then call the citizen rescue plan, in contrast to the bank rescue plan applied to sustain the financial system after its collapse in 2007. These 3 points of the minimum program were: 1, govern for the common good of the people and not for the elites. 2, to do it through a more ethical way of exercising politics. 3, which in turn would transform representative institutions into participatory institutions. This series of problems that we soon encounter at the level of our municipal governments constituted an early learning of the problems that we would have to confront in the jump up the ladder, first to the Spanish parliament and then to the coalition state government. Problem 1. The siege to which the governments of the new policy were subjected by the factual powers was immediate. The novelty that we did not foresee is that the de facto powers would not only use private instruments, such as the media, but they could also do so understanding that the democratic institutions themselves are a battlefield. For example, through the exercise of lawfare, judicial wars which consists of opposing through justice the deployment of anti-oligarchic policies. The world-famous case of Lula, the former Brazilian president, has been replicated for years in countless cases that have occurred constantly on the scale of the municipal governments of the new politics in Spain. The issue is very delicate. It's not simple at all, because it is about counteracting the political instrumentalization of justice while at the same time respecting the separation of powers so dear to anti-systemic authoritarianism. Problem 2. Over the decades, we have been able to grasp the destructive nature of neoliberalism, but we have perceived much less of its ability to reorganize the dynamics of the state administration. Government institutions have been reorganized in a neoliberal manner in such a way that they make it extremely difficult to apply policies based on principles of the common good. This is especially serious at municipal levels of government because the application of immediate measures for the daily life of the closest population is difficult, and because local institutions do not have the legislative capacity to modify the procedures that would favor operating in favor of the communities. New public-common alliances that have to replace the public-private alliances that have been characteristic of the instrumentalization of democratic institutions by neoliberalism. Problem number 3. At a time when democratic institutions have been corrupted, the new policy had to play a paradoxically conservative role, exercise institutional politics in a more honest, more transparent, more ethical, and more paradoxically institutional way. This means that gaining authority to exercise the government quickly enter into contradiction with the contesting power of the citizen movements, with their anti-systemic sex appeal at a time when society still felt that the system was failing them and that institutional work was not meeting expectations for the large-scale, rapid responses that were needed. The spectacular institutional leap of municipalism in Spain in 2015 had its correlate in a spectacular collapse of the municipalist movement in 2019, when practically all the cities were lost, with the exception of only Cádiz and Barcelona, almost by chance. The analysis of this collapse have tended to emphasize the insurmountable difficulties that these governments faced. Undoubtedly, the opposition suffered by the councils of change was ruthless. But I am going to give you a piece of information. The day after the resounding municipalist electoral defeat, we did not have a single organic space, not a single formal instance, nothing at all where we could meet formally to console ourselves in the defeat, study the reasons for the failure, and prepare the offensive for 4 years later. The strength of municipalist electoral platforms apparent in 2015 proved to be a phantasmagoria. With the electoral defeat of 2019, the general collapse of the municipalist organizations of the new politics took place, with the exception of Barcelona en Comú and few other residues in other cities. It is often discussed how the transition from social movements to institutions weakened social movements due to the transfer of social leaders to institutional work. We were prepared for this discussion, but we did not envision how the municipalist institutional leap would weaken our own municipalist organizations. We thought that the opposite would happen mechanically. But it didn't. And that allows us to extract another important lesson for today. The fact that having the government does not mean having all the power can only be confronted through the virtuous articulation of 3 components: governments and other institutional workspaces, social movements, and organized civil society. The organizations of the new policy had to fulfill precisely a coordinating role between these three components. It is not just about reproducing the nature of the traditional parties, but with new political figures or new political programs. It is about reinventing the party form as an articulating mechanism between other leap into institutions, the push of social movements, and the strength of democratically organized civil society. The general collapse of the Spanish municipalist space in 2019 was not only a defeat against the de facto powers, it was also a symptom of our insufficient political imagination, or a symptom of the difficulties in implementing in practice organizational forms that should be sufficiently operational to meet the challenge posed by the need to articulate institutions, movements, and society. I'm going to jump in a moment to exemplify this complex problem in a practical example, in a discussion that took place recently, very recently, in a meeting between the new Chilean president, Gabriel Boric, student leader in 2011, as you may know, in conversation with Íñigo Errejón, one of the founders of Podemos and currently one of the leaders of Más País, split from Podemos. Íñigo argued in a very insightful way that in Spain, the presidency of the government had not been achieved by electoral means, unlike Chile, due to the difference in their electoral mechanisms. Given that in Spain, the president is appointed through parliamentary agreements, it could be more difficult for us to reach the leadership of the government than in Chile, where the election is direct. It's really a smart comment, but it leaves out of the frame an important part of the Chilean reality of recent years. The institutional revolution that is taking place in Chile nowadays has two components. The presidency won by Boric and the constituent process that is taking place in a parliament that has Elisa Loncón, a Mapuche woman, as its first constituent president. Boric's victory was possible due to the previous push of the constituent process, which in turn was the result of the constituent parliamentary agreements that were made possible by the presence of the Frente Amplio, the broad front, in the Chilean parliament, an institutional leap that came after the student movement of 2011. These constituent parliamentary agreements, which were in turn provoked by the Chilean insurgency of 2019 called the Revolt, a very powerful social movement that continued and at the same time surpassed and contradicted the student movement of 2011. Without that virtuosistic articulation between destituent, instituting, and constituent components, the Chilean process of change could not be taking place with the strength that we know it today. So I'm finishing now. In short, what is the current situation? In Spain, despite the appearances of a progressive coalition government, the situation is far from ideal. Not only the organizations of the municipalist space have collapsed. Unfortunately, Podemos is currently a political party in a situation of almost decomposition. The accumulation of expulsions, bloody dissidents, aggressive marginalizations, internal struggles without sometimes the slightest respect have pushed the organization to the brink of scrapping. But those who point to the short history of Podemos as a disaster when it comes to complying with the ethical imperatives that led us to build citizen electoral organizations, forget that beyond the problems derived from scandalously irresponsible political and partisan behavior, which have existed, and a lot in fact, we are probably facing a structural problem. The incentive of institutional power, even when it's small, inevitably provokes competition between political colleagues and an individualistic drift of leaderships. In short, a neoliberal subjectivization within anti-neoliberal organizations. And in my opinion, something catastrophic has happened from the point of view of the necessary virtuous articulation that I spoke of before between the institutions, the movements, and organized society. Our institutional leap has not been able to properly empower the radical, popular, and left-wing critical social ecosystem that our coalition government would now need. The need that the institutional leap has to empower the radical, popular, and left-wing critical social ecosystem in its environment. This is crucial. Discussions are currently centered on the possible formation of a Frente Amplio, a broad front, around the emerging political figure of Yolanda Díaz, our excellent Minister of Labor. But in the current situation, no one is fooled. We are not talking about a broad front as a result of a leap of organizational imagination. We are talking much more of an improvised electoral platform as a matter of urgency to the left of the Socialist Party. The problem also lies in the fact that the policies of the progressive movement, for many reasons that I cannot stop to analyze now, are far from living up even to the initial government program, and are like years away from the real needs of a society pushed to the limit by the accumulation of crises that I spoke of at the beginning of my speech. For this reason, pinning hopes for electoral renewal more on stopping the extreme right than on the resolute implementation of a program or radical change is a bad defensive strategy, because in Spain, the extreme right is not only occupying, as it is happening in many other countries, the space of citizen discontent against democracy in general. In Spain, the extreme right is also occupying the disappointment of the part of society with the hopes that we ourselves represented by jumping to the institutions, and the disappointment with a coalition government which is timid at times when it should be brave. So what's to be done? When I ask myself this question, an image always comes to mind that I keep in my memory of what I initially called our originary moment, the occupation of the squares on M15. We were in a night assembly in a tired, worn, and tense atmosphere. We hardly found reasons to continue together occupying a space whose support was becoming increasingly difficult. Suddenly, it started to rain. First gently, then with increasing force. A mobilization of countless people happened who began to raise some blue plastic sheets above our heads, holding them to protect us from the water in such a way that the assembly suddenly became a multitude of bodies stuck together, rubbing against each other, touching each other. The contact of the bodies protecting each other, the heat of the bodies against the rain, in a strange way, relaxed the atmosphere, made the discussions more fluid. Suddenly, there we were, grouped by the invisible, constant, persistent work of a multitude of anonymous people in charge of waving, articulating, protecting, even in moments of greatest difficulties and doubts about why to continue. At that time, I asked a good friend of mine, Raúl Sánchez Cedillo, an activist philosopher, an excellent translator of Toni Negri into Spanish, Raúl, what is the reason for us to continue together, being less and less and proving so costly? Raúl replied, we must continue together because there is a multitude watching around the world for whom we mean a sign of hope. The continuous invisible work that in times of greatest difficulties holds images of hope for anyone who wants to look at them. That is my image of how to build modern organizations, more than parties, more than governments, political communities opposed to the idea of community defended by the extreme right, compact but diverse, as protective inwards as open outwards, projecting beyond themselves a horizon of hope. So thank you very much for your attention and patience.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that you kind of ended up on a little bit positive note, or at least some hope, because of course your account is also in many ways a hard one, so we will come back to that. But before turning to Teodor Celakoski, I'm glad you are here. You, of course, are right in the middle of all this, so where the others already reflect with a little bit distance. Teodor is a cultural worker, right to the city activist and politician from Zagreb. He has been engaged since the early 2000s with cultural policies, for example, as co-founder of the very important Multimedia Institute and Social Cultural Center MAMA, and of Pogon, the Zagreb Center for Independent Culture and Youth, and Cultura Nova Foundation supporting civil society organizations and many other things. In 2014, he received the European Cultural Foundation's Princess Margaret Award, and in 2017, you participated in initiating the municipal political platform Zagreb Jenaš, and in 2019, the political platform on the national level Možemo. In 2021, as I said, Zagreb local elections were won, and you were elected to the city assembly, where you currently serve as the vice president. You have a difficult position now in a way, but I'm really interested in also, I guess, the pragmatic problems you are involved in the moment, and with many things that have been mentioned, but also your very specific, concrete context. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. So basically, I decided to change a little bit of intention of my presentation, as we were required not to show any pictures and stuff like that here. I tried to do something now here in the place different than giving overall like conceptual or any kind of overall perspective to what is happening there with us now in Croatia, but more to try to tackle the current situation from one, let's say, one specific angle, and this is angle of a, let's say, of a tactical or methodological nature, and it somehow describes the overall intention that we have, like building this let's say thing in last almost 20 years. So it looks like the idea of, you know, the talks here is like from the movement to the power, the logic, and somehow the trajectory of the development there was not that easy and not that sudden in that way, that something changed from one aggregation into another, but it is more like a step-by-step type of development, more like, so it is not, when you asked me a title, I said, let's do a step-by-step thing, not meaning a title, not meaning by this that I will present things in this timely way, but that the whole approach that we do is something of, let's say, incremental type of development that takes the time consideration in respect to goals, strategy, ideology, is a crucial for understanding what we are trying to do. So instead of giving a kind of condensed picture of everything, I'd like just to present this gradual logic of development that is happening last at least 15 years in Croatia with processes ended up with this political success. So what's the near past, let's say, of this success is that of this electoral success is that in 2017 elections we emerged as a coalition or small ecosystem of organizations that were really from the margins take part in the elections, and we won something like 4 seats in the city assembly, and our candidate for the mayor, because we have a direct elections of mayor, got like less than 4% of the votes, and the list for the assembly got something less than 8% of the votes. So the work in next 4 days, in next 4 years were crucial in developing the platform in this process. So the success that came in 2020 with the parliamentary elections, where we won the coalition that we gathered, we won seven members in a parliament, and this was another step in this development towards the winning elections in Zagreb that took place in 2021. So this was a moment where we managed to have to bring this coalition into a dynamic situation of early campaigning around very specific topic that was really targeting most of the society, and that were earthquakes in 2 earthquakes in this period of time, and no politics, national or local, did really took important steps in delivering certain measures to kind of counteract the situation with disastrous situation with the earthquake. So we somehow managed to jump for these parliamentary elections and for the local elections on this issue very strongly into public discourse. And that was only one of course, one of the reasons that we were forcefully and strongly entered into this campaign for the local elections, where we won more than 40% of the votes for the assembly, and in first round our mayor candidate won more than 45% of the votes. That raised on 63 in the second round. So I'm explaining this not because of giving the facts, but basically to demonstrate the dynamic of development, and that was not a sudden thing of having a movement and then jumping into the situation of power. It was, I would say, a premeditated process of lasting, as I said, almost 20 years, where we at the beginning were totally against electoral politics. So when we started the fights around the issues of right to the city, type of struggles within the city of Zagreb and other cities in Croatia. It was somehow for us, because this mainstream politics for us was something like odious or something what, and most of the population somehow feel this, have this sentiment about the main institutional parties in Croatia. And in Croatia we have kind of a quest for the third option, a quest for another political position that wouldn't just change the position of powers between the two main parties, the conservatives and the social democrats. So that was somehow, there was a saturation of this expectation of, happening, that certain third option should arise. And we had in previous period, we have these third options, more left or right. It was kind of a different configuration of a political will at that time. So for the last 15 years, we have these situations of now and then certain left or green, even green, or some kind of not ideological, but at the end conservative positions and entered in the political fight as a third option, but never gained the success of winning some elections by being a leading option or leading party in this process. So that's the constellation where we have a kind of, or context where we have expectation that something should happen, because people are mostly unsatisfied with this basic constellation of two parties. So there was a contextual, or let's say, the reasons why we were successful, but on the other side there was this, let's say, connected to type of our campaign or organization. So one of the things was that we campaign very dedicated on a grassroots level, on the neighborhood levels, involving people in organizing and participating in a program, contribution to programs for the neighborhoods and stuff like that. So that was kind of and very early entering into the campaign. So we organized a huge machinery, let's say, in building the infrastructure and people for such an endeavor as winning the elections of a mayor of a capital city of Zagreb. So, but what is interesting here is that the movement, the civil initiatives, like fighting against real estate, huge multi-billion project on Dubrovnik, or in Zagreb, the fight, the struggle against the privatization of public squares and pedestrian zones and stuff like that. So that was a kind of a ground for building constituency, knowledge, experience, collective, let's say collective type of understanding of politics. Even though at that time we are against, institutional politics, but suddenly during this period of time we realized that you can't change if you don't interact with more closely with the system, not only confronting that or prohibiting something, or being successful in protecting some public infrastructure or common good. So we had some successes in this period. For instance, we reduced certain projects that were totally neoliberal type of development within the city center. But for instance, we managed to organize with the unions the huge campaign against privatization of highways. It was meant to give this to, for instance, one of the competitor was Goldman Sachs, like to give for a certain billion of something, to give on 15 years the newly built highways in Croatia for the concession. And together with unions, we managed to, in 15 days, because this is that type of regulation, we managed to collect more than 500,000 signatures on the street with people. So it was kind of a huge machinery in organized. So we prevented Social Democrats then in power to privatize such important infrastructure. So we didn't get the referendum. We didn't get to the point of a referendum, but they decided not to go into that direction because it was total mobilization. So having all of these struggles for more than 10 years, in this process on having them in our mind and understanding that you can stop something for some time, but then they attack again on this specific thing or topic or issue. And then we realize that we have to, of course, take part in influencing the framework, or that these type of things shouldn't happen at all. But not these struggles for public infrastructure, public space, and that was not the only, let's say, experience that we brought into the political process. So it is not about some movement, like in these other situations, jumping, into the politics, but it is about, let's say, the trajectory of involving people from these initiatives and movements, and not only these right to the city type of things, but like student movement against privatization of university and stuff like that, for free education and stuff. So feminist movement. So we have a lot of people coming from different, let's say, emancipatory practices, but it's not about, involving all of these organizations into the politics, but it is about using these experience, knowledge, and moving, so to leave the organized civil society and these initiatives on their own in developing their other projects or confrontations or whatever. So it's not about, it is really a question of do we weaken the position of the movements of organized civil society or civic initiatives or stuff like that. So, but we tend to involve the people who wanted into a political process. So we even organized a logic of political organization, a structure of political organization that allows people not to become a member of a party, because the party is the unit for institutional political struggle in our systemic environment. So you need party in order to go to the elections in Croatia. Otherwise, you depend only on certain personalities who leads the lists and stuff like that. So in that sense, having a party, but then having a platform of people who are not members of party, who are joining and let's say having possibility of influencing the political project, is one of these, let's say, innovation of participatory logic and opening a logic of political institutions. That's one part of the thing. The second part of the thing that is also step-by-step logic or let's say gradual type of understanding is the statutes of the organization we understand as a tool for developmental purposes of the organization. So we change statute every now and then because we started like a few hundred people, then there is a need of going further with several thousand people, and this is different type of organization then. And on the other side, as we wanted to have an ecosystem of political organization that are green, left, there are several of them that we make coalition for the elections, but we said we need something more of this, like that it is not only a competitive logic of, you know, we are now together and next elections, you know, we decide whatever. I mean, that's fine, that's at the end the option, but the logic of strategic partnerships between these political partners is something that we want to even further develop in direction of establishing a structure within the party that allows influence of other parties through certain coordination bodies, partnership coordination bodies and stuff like that, that they can influence on the party decision. So, and that's the process that is ongoing, it's developing now. So the whole logic was, we have a lot of local independent initiatives or even small local political parties that have they like to be, you know, separate entities, bodies, but then they still want to take part in a larger political development, and they need help and exchange and stuff like that. So we decided to have possibility of, you know, multi-membership of the parties, so that it is not exclusive type of thing. You are with us or you are against us, but that it is certain type of let's say ecosystem logic of political entities that should somehow present the full scale of different ideological or different even personality or leadership logic and stuff like that. So, but on the other side, the whole logic of a party structure is we have like a lot of in common with Barcelona and Como in this logic of organizing a party structure, that it is not only, you know, this fight between the individuals that are located in some, you know, specific geographic location, and then they position themselves against the others in this process. We have like also this logic of thematic, technical, and territorial coordinations that brings from the position of these specific logics, that brings people onto the board, to the council as a political body of the party. So we want also other parties, members who want this strategic partnership or even merger to take part in one another coordination that will provide people to take part in this central council that make decisions. So this is kind of exact the opposite logic of having parties that only with usual type of competitive market logic within the party is gaining, you know, the political momentum of ideas and leadership. So in that sense, that is, let's say, innovative. And again, we are using this approach of gradual step-by-step development of this. So structure both as a goals is a field of thinking gradual. So basically, when you are confronted with certain type of let's say ideological positions, you always somehow have a kind of very let's say very static approach to what are the goals or what is the identity or entity, what is the identity of the specific political entity. People tend to judge this in this not dynamic type of approach, like you are this or that, you are a liberal or you are this, or you are radical left. Or so in that sense, putting the goals and the values in time perspective, you know, like especially when you are in position when you are in a position of being in power, that is something what is crucial to develop this understanding within your constituency and towards the public. So what are the long-term goals, what are the mid-term, and what are the short-term goals? And what is interesting, we are now in Zagreb in this position of power, where we, as a first step or first phase of development, we had to deliver certain type of measures that looks from this ideological, not ideological perspective, but from this frozen type of, you know, understanding of ideology or values or political positions. It looks like we are liberals. Because of the legacy of the system, we had to deliver a certain, like, there are too many employed people on leadership positions, administrative positions, coordination positions in public companies, and like there are in all of these public companies there are like 10,000 people, and there are, in comparisons to other similar type of public companies, there are too many of these, you know, and there is too many of these type of leading director position, then the middle management, administrative position, stuff like that. So, and that was kind of scheme of a corrupt government, of a clientelistic kind of political system where everybody somehow were bought, you know, in this last 20 years of having one mayor in power. So it was somehow the situation where it was clear that these measures of you know, cutting of course, offering people to go to other, because we have too many employed, but not enough employed people on jobs that provide service, you know, to citizens. So we have too many agency employed people, not employed, but, you know, engaged people. So we want to, because this is uncertain type of engagement, So we want to cut this and employ people, these people that are that provide services to the citizens. But on the other side, we have kind of too many of people that have had ties to enter, and some of them really, I mean, that is hard to hear, like don't do anything. I mean, this is that type of corrupt system of government. So we inherited the system of too many people employed through these means. Everything is outsourced in a way, and we have totally on the verge of bankruptcy, too indebted government or position of governing, and then you have also a situation of totally devastated infrastructure, like water infrastructure for water is like we have every now and then failure of these pipes and stuff like that. So this is a huge investments, like billions of euros that were not invested for 60, 70 years. So that's what we inherited. And then when we say, okay, we have to, to decrease the number of employed, then the critique is like, this is neoliberal measure, So that's kind of, being in position of a movement very much differs from the position in being in power, not because of this type of tough decisions, but because the logic is not that much around values and your specific position around your emancipatory position, but it's about finding, the balance between your values, day-to-day tactics and strategies of fighting that could be also internal, not still with us, but that are external. You have to you have everyday fights around how you position in a daily fights around a different topic, and then you have a managerial issue, governance issues that are basically you are responsible for the system functioning. So we said the first step, the first phase in this step-to-step logic is to cope with this inherited type of thing. And in this phase, it looks like we have anti-corruption, transparency, whatever logic. It looks like a liberal agenda, but this is only a first step in coping with the system. So you have to find a way of understanding all aspects of the situation in order to deliver certain things. Next phase, immediate phase. This is like a first year of being in power. Then you have another step that is a strategic project that will show your values, your ideology, your position, your crucial position when you kind of manage to cope with the system. Then you have to deliver these things that really differs. And when you don't have a fuel for this, because of this, I mean, we wouldn't come to power if this situation would be better, So this plebiscite, in a way, for winning this election was a result of this type of system. And for instance, this issue of dealing with too many of employed people in the public companies, is supported. We take the public poll agency just to see what is, because the media is really fighting against us. They're using everything, to kind of suppress this logic. Because even though those who were for these neoliberal reforms of cuttings and stuff like that, they are against this now because we are doing this, but not for the sake of cuttings, but for the logic of surviving and transforming system in a different way. But for instance, we have a support for this of more than 72% of people. So in a city for this type of measures. So, but it is not like a populistic type of, we will solve things, but it is kind of a necessary step. So that's kind of example of gradual. So some of the people that are our inner circle were saying what is happening, in that sense, or criticizing this from let's say some left positions, but we are explaining and providing the information why it's at the moment it is necessary. So maybe with this example I can conclude. I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you. I mean, of course, I would have immediately a lot of follow-up questions because we are right in the middle of something here, but also to your contributions. But since we're already a bit running late, I would maybe, to bring you back into the room, Athena, ask you if you have a direct response maybe to what you heard now.
Thank you, Florian. First of all, I would like to thank both my older friend, old in terms of our friendship, Marcelo, and the new friend and ally, Teodor. I've learned so much today, really. I thank you both for these wonderful outlines. I have a question, a thought for Teodor, because that, well, first of all, I would like to say that the victory of Možemo was one of the most inspiring source of hope and exhilaration recently. So it seems that the party or the coalition or the platform, as Teodor puts it, has a very clear commitment to the political values of egalitarianism, social solidarity, gender equality, environmentalism, and I'm curious to what extent, Teodor, you think that Možemo gained the trust of the electorate because of a certain left identity of this platform, or despite of it? I mean, do you think that, for example, Možemo has managed to extend its appeal beyond the left-leaning circles? For example, Zagreb is very well known for its left, academia and intelligentsia. So has it extended beyond its appeal beyond these circles? And then my sort of second question would be, it seems that that this victory inscribes the ways in which the relevance of the economy and the anti-austerity initiatives that we have seen in Southern Europe, Spain, Greece, Portugal, and so on, are now associated with a new generation, let's say, of political actors having a vision of a new Europe. And I wonder to what extent the painful legacies of the 90s have played a role in this emergence of new political actors in Europe. Was it a relevant historicity, this one, or was it totally irrelevant? Thank you so much. You presented us with a very vivid outline of Možemo. Thank you so much, and I wish you the best of luck and courage.
Thank you. It was kind of a bit of broken connection now. Did I hear it well? You asked about 90s, the development in 90s, and did this make some kind of relevance for the nowadays these new movements and political developments?
Yeah, and before the question also, if you won despite your leftist agenda or because of the leftist agenda.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of, it is a tough question. I think it is combination. I mean, why we decided to have a Možemo name? I mean, this is the intention of most of these type of political projects, is that somehow not losing we are clearly green left positioned in the ideological sense and values, but somehow we decided not to put this as a label, you know, because we believe that most of the population is affected by the economic crisis, so somehow, you know, only targeting those nominally being only in shelf of certain ideological position is might be kind of might be not that useful for entering into political battles in our dominantly last 30 years very conservative societies. So, but it is not only a tactic, it is about really understanding that we have to enter with our teams with issues of a concern of a majority of population, enter into the, you know, in that sense, into the social fabric in a way, you know. So it's not only electorate in that sense. So this is our intention, you know. We don't cover our values and positions and ideologies, but we tend to go beyond this in appeal towards the people, you know, that our angle to the existing problem is more useful or more just for most of the people in that sense. So that the right-wing position that targeting the different aspects of different crises is totally scary type of development that we have to confront. So in that sense, this is really this like radical fights between radical, because we were called radical left in Croatia somehow, but our radical left friends are calling us, you know, like liberal. So this is, I mean, this naming game. I'm not really interested in you know, this placard type of, you know, dealing with things. And it counts at the end. I mean, what you delivered and how you really change things. So in that sense, yeah, our attempt is to go beyond the logic of only ideological identification. We don't cover them because there are political options that, as I said, from the right, that tried to, you know, to cover the core of their dominant ideologies. So in that sense, I think people should be fair in their tactics in a political life. How much this is a difficult thing to do. So I think that was important ingredient because we have a part of a quest for the third option. There is a crisis of prolonged crisis of social democrats because they after the economic crisis, financial crisis 2008, they didn't realize that the world really drastically changed, you know, that this optimistic approach to, you know, neoliberal economy is somehow swallowed them into this process. So we emerged as a result of, I think, also as a result of this, not only these specific struggles, but as this general environment and context. So in that sense, yes, we positioned ourselves as a critique of social democrats, but the green left critique. So, I mean, that's the reason I think that was part of the success. And the second thing, 90s, I will be briefly, I mean, the notion in Croatia about 90s, and everybody agrees on this, except those who took advantage from this situation. I mean, maybe this is the only consensus in Croatia, you know, no matter of nationality and stuff like that, or is that the privatization was corrupt. So this understanding of, you know, the whole process of so-called transition was kind of damaged, and this is a popular understanding of a thing, of development. So in that sense, this is the reason why new political options, because those existing are not really coping, I mean, not really dealing, not with this privatization, because this is, you know, finished story in that sense, but, you know, like understanding of, you know, big fraud of within the society that is unjust for the majority of the people. So in that sense, yeah, we can make connections also with this understanding of 90s.
Marcelo, do you want to add your thoughts at the moment?
Concerning Athena's question around the leftism and so on, I mean, the left is always very concerned about its own identity as left, right? And in critical moments of crisis, the key, I mean, it's easy to say, but it's difficult to accomplish. But the key thing is to make the leftist agenda become common sense. I mean, that's simple. Meaning that the leftist agenda has to become, instead of being like the 10 commandments, right, that everybody has to buy, it has to become something like the articulation of different demands, which are different but have something in common, right? So the leftist agenda has to become somehow like an hegemonic agenda of the interest of the whole of society. I mean, it sounds abstract, but in the end means that if evictions are affecting everybody, if you insist that stopping evictions is some kind of leftism, then you are fucked up. Because actually stopping evictions has, in a way, I mean, I will put it bluntly, has nothing to do with left or the right. It has to do with being able to identify collective interests in a moment of crisis, being able to put different demands and different political identities together and articulate them. Articulate them means more than adding them. meaning that when you articulate them, everybody is changes through the connection with others. One thing that happened at the beginning of new politics in Spain, which is very interesting, is that the platform against evictions, the PA, that I mentioned before, was very important. This hasn't been analyzed sufficiently. They were very important in avoiding that a fascist alternative to the crisis would come up in the early years of the crisis. Why was that? Because the platform was at the beginning mostly composed of Latin American migrants. And why was that? Because they were among the first strongly affected by the crisis. And even when they were among the first strongly affected by the crisis, they were already used in their home countries to suffer crisis, economical crisis or social crisis in their biographies. That meant that they were not ashamed to recognize themselves as people evicted or people with their private economies in ruins. And they help, let's say, Spanish or local people to go through their own processes of recognizing that the Spanish middle class had collapsed. And through recognizing themselves as people struck by the crisis, they created alliances that stopped the possibility of the right-wing government and the extreme right to turn the crisis into another civil war between between the working classes or the popular classes. So the interesting thing is that the PA didn't insist that stopping the evictions, to put it very simply, was part of a leftist agenda. They made this idea become common sense, and through this common sense, they articulated different political identities, people coming from different social or origins, whatever. That was really very interesting to see how this operated, how you can construct an agenda which is a common sense, coming probably from a classical leftist ideas, but you don't get stuck to the obsession of that your agenda has to be recognized as a leftist agenda and that has to be bought by everybody. That's one thing. Even though nowadays everything has become more complicated because the increasing presence of the extreme right in Spanish society and institutions. So, in a way, something has happened in Spain that might happen maybe in different other situations in the future, which is that the neo-fascism or the extreme right has managed to make their agenda become more and more the common sense, while the former new politics tends to call itself more and more as a leftist agenda against the extreme right. So that's really a very tricky situation in which they tend to present themselves as something beyond the division left and right, while they push yourself in electoral terms, for instance. One of the games which is played in a very tricky way by our parties in the government, Podemos, and also the Socialist Party. One of the games they play is to present themselves as the left, as an alternative to the increasing to the extreme right growing up, while the extreme right is presenting themselves as a common sense, as to say, movement against both the continuation of the crisis and the disappointments of the leftist government It's really very tricky, but things have been like turning around slightly, and that's why that was one of the reasons that I think the situation is very complicated today for a transformative agenda to deal with these questions of getting stuck to the left-right division, or to try to overcome it. I mean, it's not so simple in this moment in Spain in particular.
Since you raised this question, Athena, you want also to add something to this?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with what Marcelo just said. I do believe that the left must take on government responsibilities and not exhaust its actions at resistance and protest. However, I do believe that taking power should not be its first and foremost priority at all costs. And Marcelo just said earlier that having the government does not mean that you have the power, and this is something that we need to decode very, very deeply, I think. So that's why I find important for the left to focus on an open-ended struggle for ideological hegemony. It's what Marcelo described like in the sense of transforming the left agenda into common sense. So this is a struggle for ideological hegemony, and I totally agree with this. And I think taking on government responsibilities can be part of this process, but does not exhaust the political horizon of the grassroots movements and our radical imagination, I think. And then, because you asked before, Florian, if this conversation can be all too practical and all that, not at all. Although I have to confess that I am someone who denied the invitation to take part in the SYRIZA cabinet. Although I did support the government, but I didn't participate for various reasons that we don't have time to expand on at this late moment. But it's not too practical. My concern, if you wish, right now is that I think that we need to think more about what actuality means for the movements and for our radical hopes. What is it that we want to actualize? Because I think that it is necessary to think in what terms we don't prefer left melancholy to actual action. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that human subjects make history, but not in conditions of their own choosing, right, Marx? So there are certain limitations that we need to take into consideration. And for me, this is a kind of what Benjamin has described as the task of organizing pessimism. So we need to somehow organize our pessimism or cultivate our hope by taking inspiration from these practical examples, these sources of hope like Možemo and the history of Podemos, and the history of SYRIZA, the history of Mera 25. I mean, at some point we need to rethink what is going on with the divided left in Europe and beyond, and how we could work for a unity capable of difference and ambiguity and subtlety. Can we do that? Is it important to work on that, to work on a new international solidarity? I think certainly, as Judith Butler has written recently, I do believe too that this is the time for international anti-fascist solidarity. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's great last words. There are many unanswered questions, but I keep it for another session, and I think we can continue in other ways this conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Athena, Marcelo, Theo, for joining tonight. Thank you for coming here, and thanks everybody watching on the stream. And I hope we will meet again. Thanks and good night.